All righty. Well, hello
Got this
everyone.
okay?
Hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. On the program tonight, in our All Things Canada edition, so honored to be joined by Scott Taylor, the founder, editor-in-chief of Esprit de Corps, which is a military magazine uh, covering Canadian topics, which he founded in 1988. Mr. Taylor has won Press TV's Unembedded Journalist of the Year award back in 2008, and he's the author of several books, which include Tarnished Brass, Crime and Corruption in the Canadian Military, Diary of an Uncivil War, The Violent Aftermath of the Kosovo Conflict, Unembedded, 2 decades of Maverick war reporting, Unreconciled Differences, Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and he's appeared in great documentaries like Truth to the Powerless, a 6-part docuseries on Canada's imperial history, past and present, and Yugoslavia, the Avoidable War, The Weight of Chains, Myth for Profit, Afghanistan, Outside the Wire, and from Belgrade to Baghdad, and Homecoming, The Casualties of War. He's often cited in the work of a frequent guest to this show, historian, media critic, and geocritic, anti-imperialist thinker and activist Yves Engler. He's our guest on One Plus One. So, firstly, Mr. Taylor, thank you so much for thank you so much for coming on the program. It's a real honor to have you on.
My pleasure. I hope I can help.
Oh, you will definitely. And so now, because we won't have too much time, I'm going to ask you to be brief in the first three questions. So the first question I wanted to ask you is talk to us about your background and explain your publication Esprit de Corps. And then a follow-up question to that would be, what were some of the biggest journalism muckraking accomplishments from the 80s, one from the 90s, and one from the early 2000s that you did with your publication Esprit de Corps, which is a military magazine.
But be brief. That's
As
the
best
key.
as you
All right.
can. As best as you can, if it's even possible.
Background. I was an artist originally. I'm a graduate of the Ontario College of Art, so my background is in illustration. So I mean, part of that came back in with, of course, the magazine being visual, and we do create, myself and my wife, battlefield history like illustrations to this day with research and stuff. But my love at the time, I mean, military history, when I was going through art college, was really a big divide. I read all this stuff, and I just saw my career going into art and into a studio somewhere, and then just getting married to my fiance, who was coming up a year behind me in art. My dad's an artist. My whole world was just going to be tunneled into this thing, and I thought, no, I haven't done anything yet. I haven't gone out and lived anything yet. For me to be an illustrator, to express, I was like being a poet that's never loved. I mean, it's just one of those things. If you don't know what it's really like, how do you express it? How do you paint it? How do you feel it? So I joined the army, and I wanted to be a soldier. I mean, it was a 3-year engagement. I had to tell my fiance and my family at the time I was taking a bit of a career path change. It was regular force. I got in, loved it, discovered things about myself. And I'd been an athlete before in high school, but then now was allowed to do that part as well. I mean, art college didn't have any track and field, didn't have any football teams. All of a sudden we're back, and that's being something which I ended up being. I was the fastest guy in the army when I was in there. I set the records for the 1500 and 5000. So it was something where I could get back into the sports. I competed in the biathlon at the national level as part of the army. Took my commando course with the French army, learned, so I became special forces. I learned that whole part of it, got to know the mindset completely about what these guys are like, which certainly helped later on in life. When I got out in Germany, my wife and I wanted to keep living in Germany. We were based in Germany. I went back to my roots. I became the base graphic artist for the military. And my wife was doing illustrations over there as well. We were doing a whole bunch of stuff on the side, putting things together. So it sort of all melded into, I got a job as an art director at nights for a ski magazine and a golf magazine. And this guy was an entrepreneur. So he was going to Bangkok to get color separations and flying back, printing in Germany. I mean, we learned all the ropes from this guy, how the advertising was important, the distribution was important, all the stuff, the aspects of it. And then I realized that I don't golf and I don't ski. Not recreationally. So I was like, what am I doing? I love the military still. I was loved the stuff. So we created Esprit de Corps in 1988, my wife and I. And the idea of it originally was to be the seat back in-flight magazines aboard. The Air Force had its own little mini airline. They had 707 jetliners because they were flying guys back and forth to Germany. They were flying guys all across Canada when they're going between bases. They had their own airline, which had nothing, no in-flight entertainment, no radio, no audio, no nothing. So you're sitting there for 8 hours, captive audience. You're not going to get a better readership than that. So we proposed it. It was bilingual. They got to control the content, which was fine with us. But for me, it meant I could now, as I started at the age of 27, believe it or not. So the idea was that if something was happening in Namibia, or those troops are going somewhere there, I could go do the story. I was the correspondent. I got to have the adventure. I could now do stuff with the Navy. I could go on a submarine. I could go on a boat. I could do things which the Army wasn't allowing me to. I was serving in my unit. I was doing, but you don't get to choose where you go. Now, if my unit wasn't going somewhere, but I wanted to go see that unit, I would just go and fly up into the Arctic, and all the adventures that I could have as a young man. It was incredible. And then along came the first Gulf War and Oka crisis, and we decided to go big. We went monthly. We went on our own. We went out of the seat backs and put it on the newsstand. By that time, we'd been around for a couple of years. And like these things, people were suddenly interested again. The Gulf War was one thing, the Oka crisis, but we weren't, as a quarterly, we weren't able to give any kind of news frequency to what we were doing. But to go monthly gave us the flexibility. And again, it was the writing that I was doing. I mean, I was pumping this stuff out. I'm not a trained journalist, but I mean, I learned to write, and just you had to do it. I mean, you had to file it. You had to go out, come back, put it together, figure it out, and then you realize you're going to places like Cambodia, and it wasn't big enough for the mainstream guys to send somebody. But if I came back and I started writing freelance hits for the Ottawa Citizen, the Ottawa Sun, the Toronto Sun, and then we began to work relationships with those same people when corruption reared its ugly head in the military. We didn't even know it existed, but people said, "Look, you're a like a soap mix between oil and water. You're not fish, you're not fowl. You're media, but you're not really, because you're a soldier." People knew me from what I'd been in, so it was easy to get them to say, "Yeah, sure, tag along with us, or do this, do that." So when people were shedding or shunning the embedded idea, when the war began in the Balkans, when our peacekeepers started going into there, it was one of the first wars where you could be on multi sides of the war, because it was no real front line. You were in it everywhere you went. There was different factions, different groups. So to go with the military seemed to be a cop out. You're going into, and I was going in to do stories on those guys, not the bigger picture as they would. And that's what led us into it like that. And covering the first Gulf War, I got up into Kuwait. I saw firsthand. I mean, I covered the aftermath. Our guys, we sent combat engineers in there. So I visited those guys. And as a soldier who had been pretty keen and gung ho, and I realized what we did to the Iraqis. I mean, when you realize how impoverished they were, how poorly equipped they were, how poorly trained they were, their tactics were terrible. They got massacred. And when you saw the bodies, I mean, there was like hundreds of thousands of bodies on Death Highway and around, and they were just left there until they could bury them, all the vehicles, all the stuff. And to realize
that firsthand, sorry to interrupt, but you saw firsthand the highway to death.
Yeah,
so this was when Iraq actually surrendered to the U.S., Canada, and its allies, and on orders from Bush and so forth, they actually just massacred the Iraqi soldiers. What's known as the Highway of Death, and then so you saw firsthand the depleted uranium that America and its allies used on the Iraqis, which Iraq has one of the highest rates of not just cancer, but also very gruesome deformities and so forth, because of, ironically, the weapons of mass destruction that the U.S. and its allies used on Iraq.
Very much close to my heart, near and dear, is the DU thing, because I was on Death Highway. So were the Canadian engineers. We climbed all over those things. The engineers were there. They called themselves the Lost Boys. I think I was the only journalist that visited them at the time. Took pictures of them climbing all over the vehicles in Death Highway. And then they had an exposure when the American ammunition dump blew up in Kuwait. These guys were there on the scene. They got a presidential unit citation because of how they reacted under fire. Why they were so calm and why the Americans were so panicked is because our guys didn't know that it was DU ammunition that was blowing up. So our guys, the Lost Boys, were exposed to a massive amount of DU fallout. I was exposed to DU. My own son has a birth defect. He's come through it. He just got married. I think I told you that. but he was born, he wouldn't have made it. I mean, he had to have his throat joined to his stomach. He had a congenital defect, as did many of the guys from the guys got sick, or they had kids with the congenital defects from that unit. Now, we found out about that, and the Ottawa Citizen did some great legwork, because D&D they knew of it. They were aware that they'd been exposed to massive amounts of thing. Never told these engineers, did not tell them, because they didn't want them to worry about it. Which, if my employer realized I'd been exposed to massive amounts of radiation, called me in and said, this is what's happened. We're going to monitor you. We're going to keep checking on you. It might not be anything, but we really care about you. I'd be happier than if they said, look, we knew it happened to you, but we didn't want you to worry. So we hid the fact, which is what happened. And it was the Ottawa Citizen that tracked down these guys, because most of them retired, got out, and if they got sick, they had no idea that their mates had gotten sick as well, or that their mates had birth defects with their children. So, and even when I knew that they were going to do this survey to check with them, when D&D was finally pushing and doing it, they didn't want my statistic. I said I was there, and D&D denied. One of the things that they said when McLean's did an article was that at no time were our troops on death highway. I had the photographs. I gave them to McLean's for free, because it showed our guys not only on the highway but on the vehicles. Sometimes a picture's worth more than 1,000 words. It was worth 200,000. They were just flat out lying. And even like one of the guys involved, he got some kind of commendation. We put that in the book Tested Metal, because that was part of it, was exposed when that happened. And it was just little things as you put in one story, and someone else says, well, you know that they were exposed to depleted uranium. That was depleted uranium. You go, no, I didn't know that. And then you check on that and you find out this, and then you started to look into experts. When I went into Iraq in 2000, that was one of my stories. I went down to Basra, and I looked at the amount of birth defects that they had, the horrific. The only thing that was comparable was the aftermath of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the equivalent for the radiation exposure and the defects. And they had all these galleries and stuff. And I saw the kids in the hospital. I saw the kids dying of leukemia. I mean, I went in and I did a gut-wrenching story in the summer of 2000, because it was gut-wrenching. And I admit there was one scene. I was in the hospital with some other British. They weren't journalists. They were activists. They were there. Very few foreigners were allowed in the summer of 2000. So I was there to do stories on the effects of the sanctions and on the effects of the oil for food program, right? So there was, because my own son had a birth defect, I was there. There was a lot of reasons why I wanted to see and expose this stuff. And you could hear this wailing when we were in the hospital. And then we went up, and there was an orderly was coming out with this waif-like, he was apparently like 15 or something, but he looked to be about 6 years old. And the orderly was carrying him out, and the mother was literally holding onto his leg, being dragged across the floor. And I knew, I mean, I'm not an American, but I could have won a Pulitzer Prize if I snapped that pic of the look on his face of he's just numb. And then the pouring out of her soul, this woman carrying, or holding on. And then it was I remember it was the doctor's turn to come in. I was with the doctor, and then all the other women that were looking after their kids in the same ward, they're all staring at him. And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, because this guy had been next to the door, the one who died. He says, well, now I have to move them, and they know the one next to the door is the one most likely to go. Like, they're all dying from leukemia, but they knew that when he moved them, when he did the bed shuffle, the one coming in from the outside was going to go to the window, but the one that picked next to the wall, or next to the door, sorry. So it was just this crazy emotional, like, how the hell do you live with that? How do you do that? And the outside world had no idea. Now, I did a story, and it was like I had to give my roll of film to some guy I didn't know, but he was there. He was having the same thing. I was the only journalist, but I said, look, you got to get this film out of here. And you had to cross the desert to get to Jordan, to get out on a flight. Like, it wasn't something you could just take a picture of and upload it to the world. This was 2000. We had to come back, develop the pictures, run them in the paper, and it was still pre-internet, so I don't think those photographs are out there. But it was something which did get picked up. Very few people were going in, and I'm proud of that work that I did. That was one of them. You asked about stuff that we've done. I was in Iraq. I continued to have an association with Iraq when the lead up to the second Gulf War, with the invasion. And I was in Baghdad when the word came out from Tony Blair, said he had the satellite imagery that proved that he was rebuilding his nuclear reactor.
Saddam Hussein,
so the Iraqis freaked out. They said he was 45 minutes away from having the bomb. Blair was going to fly in and meet with Bush, and they were going to combine their dossier, the sexy dossier. So the Iraqis got a picture of the satellite imagery that he was using and rounded up. There was about 12 foreign journalists from all different countries at the time, and I was one of them. They put us on a bus, and they brought about 45 Iraqi journalists on a bigger bus out to the site, and they showed us the site. And there was nothing. It was like, since the Israelis had bombed it in 80 or 81, whenever it was left. You had birds nesting in the wires that were there. You had, like, inside there was a couple of security guards, and stuff was dripping. It was like, this is like right out of a scene from Homer Simpson. It was like unbelievable. Nothing was happening. Nothing was being constructed. And it was like a whole map we could go through and see everything that was purported to be being built was not being built. And we filmed it. And one of the Americans, Brit, somebody said, oh, but we were on the bus to leave. He said, we didn't see this building yet. So we turned around and went back and looked, and there was nothing there either. But it was like everyone wanted to find as much as they could. They wanted to find something. There was nothing there.
So you're one of the first people to actually expose in real time that the invasion of Iraq was based on.
It was lies, but I had to come back. I videotaped it, but I came back, and I forget who I was filming for at the time. But we gave the footage to, I think it was CTV here in Canada, and they did run it. Yeah, I mean, I like to believe that's one of the reasons why Canada did say no. I mean, there was other people. Some of the embassies had reopened at that time. The French had an ambassador there. Like they drove him out. He saw it for himself. Like, I mean, there was a reason why Colin Powell was laughed off the stage when he went in to present his stuff. Everyone else had back room said no, this is not happening.
But do you
think,
like
a single drone?
But that being said, do you think now Canada, of course, because of the unprecedented protest that was happening, not just globally, but in Canada, particularly in Quebec, do you think? Do you think that's why Canada officially never joined the coalition of the willing, but behind the scenes they were, helping the Anglo-American Empire in their criminal endeavors in Iraq?
Canada is what Belarus is to Russia. Canada is to the U.S. We're another vote at the UN. We're independent. But to anybody to really truly believe that we're separate from them, I mean, we know what's right. We know that we needed to say no, and then there was no way we could say no to Afghanistan after that. So it was the lesser of two evils, if you will, to be part of ISAF and put our troops there. And then, ironically, when we got out of Afghanistan, and then there was pressure for NATO to come back into Iraq, Iraq was the lesser of two evils. It was easier to sell Canadians on going into Iraq to train than it was to go back to Afghanistan, because we knew that was a shit show and we were just going to get killed. Iraq, at least, if it was training exercise, we could do it. But it was just this weird irony that we flipped. We didn't go to Iraq, so we had to go to Afghanistan, and we went to Iraq because we weren't going to go back to Afghanistan. So, and people talk about it being our trading partner, and we've got to do this. It's just pragmatic. During the course of our 10 years in Afghanistan, Canada lost its place as the major trading partner with America to Mexico. Mexico didn't send a single soldier anywhere. So it wasn't about, oh, we're doing this because we want to keep our position. They're going to treat us favorably, or it's going to be something great. In fact, when they, and this was my old regiment, my battalion, the 2nd Battalion PPCLI was in the Tarnak farm in Kandahar when they had a friendly fire incident. And our guys weren't engaging the enemy. They were doing a training, just a range exercise, when an American pilot went down and somebody said, don't go, they're friendlies. And he went down anyway. He said, I'm under attack, which was impossible because he was at 20,000 feet and they were firing at ground targets. Claimed he went in, and he killed 4 and he injured 8. Friendly fire, but then they kept saying it was the fog of war. There was no fog. It was a training exercise. He was seriously told, don't do it. He did it. And they wouldn't even give us, the Canadians wouldn't even give us the name of the pilot. We had a hockey team that got booed in the U.S. after that because, they were looking for justice from these pilots. And they booed the Canadian anthem because we didn't know how to fight a war. That friendly fire is the reality. And it's like, well, if had it been a Canadian pilot who deliberately disobeyed orders, flew down and killed 4 Americans, I think we wouldn't have just given him the name. We would have given him the guy. It was just, and the pilot who did this, his name was his code name, what do they call it? His nickname was Psycho Schmidt. and he was that was his call sign, Psycho, and it's
Unbelievable.
just
Well,
so he had the.
I actually have a question about Afghanistan later if we have time. But actually, let me ask you this question then, because many people, their knowledge of the Canadian military, apart from where the Canadian military is fighting the war, is actually quite limited. So I have to ask this question, which is, now in the U.S., those who often serve in the military often come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and joining the military, at least on paper and in practice, unless of course you're killed in combat, you're promised single payer health care, a form of mental health care, and free education or low cost education, higher education that the government pays for. So in Canada, what are the perks and the social contract that's often promised to soldiers? Is it like in the US? And if it's not like in the US, do you think a GI Bill or a veterans bill like in the US should be, you know, made and passed in Canada?
So, I mean, we've been working on it in Canada with the veterans. I mean, it was at the beginning when they first started getting casualties and guys coming back from the peacekeeping operations in like former Yugoslavia. That was the system was not set up to deal with anything. I mean, we'd had the benefit of the Cold War. If it ever goes, the balloon goes up, you're not going to really have to deal with anybody because nuclear war will all be dead. So they didn't really have anything in place, and we didn't actually fight. Cyprus was a peacekeeping operation that was, the odd gunshot here and there, maybe a couple of guys injured over time, but it was not something which was really active. So once we got our guys into harm's way in the former Yugoslavia, we started getting guys killed, blown up by mines, stuff that was happening. The system really broke down. I mean, we literally had cases where guys they're being discharged because of the state of their injuries, and they were taken from the military medical center down to the curb and put into a taxi, and then the wheelchair was taken away. And the guy's like, "What am I going to do?" They go, "Well, you're not ours anymore," and the wheelchair is. So out you go. So the guy, like, it was really,
But
it
can
was
but
too.
so so,
We
so,
did
so
these stories in Tarner. Tested Metal was the peacekeepers, and we did a documentary subsequent to that, Homecoming: The Casualties of War. And things did improve rapidly once people found out this was happening. Stuff that their guys have been exposed to, some toxins, the guys that were exposed to the in Kuwait with the depleted uranium. We did those stories and we pushed them and we got out, and people had to start backtracking. And the whole idea of PTSD, there was no screening at all. Guys would come back from Yugoslavia. Now, here again, people say, well, they weren't really involved in a full out war. They were there as armed peacekeepers, and they were in between the factions. And we had guys that were being forced to be witnesses to incidents without being allowed to participate. So they were like, the thing for them was, why am I here? My unit was there, my old unit, and they could hear the screams of the women being raped, and they could see the buildings being set on fire, and they were being held back by New York. They weren't allowed to go forward until they had the agreement in place. And when they finally did go in, there was one group. It was two young 14-year-old Serbian girls that had been raped by the Croatians, and then they set them on fire as they left. They were burnt alive. And when our guys put them into the body bag, they were still so hot that they melted the body bag. So our guys were seeing things which no human should have to see, but they knew, and they were there to protect people, and then they weren't allowed to. So you come back with that, and then when they returned, when they got in the parade square, they said, "Does anybody? We got to read this form. Does anybody think they're crazy?" No. Okay. And this was back at the early stages when it was one of those things where any sign of weakness, you're not going to admit that to your employer, as much as you might need help. I mean, you might get free medical assistance, you might get psychiatric treatment and everything. But the minute you tell your employer, "I think I'm breaking down," or "I think I'm not capable," you're not going to get a promotion. You're not going to get command of whatever. I mean, you're going to be sidelined because everybody on the team depends on everyone else on the team. And that's where even back in the day, drug use was pretty much the team regulated that because you didn't want to work, in a profession of lethal force where somebody's stoned. Like that's going to put you at risk. So they didn't have to really enforce it. The guys took care of it. It was like one of those things where you made sure that they knew that that was not
but
something you wanted.
but if I understand correctly, so Canada doesn't really have what the United States have in terms of a GI Bill or a veterans bill in which you get all these benefits. if you volunteer to serve in the military. So
There
Canada,
is there is a package now that we're talking back in the 90s. And then since then, with all the pressure, there's a big lump sum payment that they can get, or they also get, there's whatever they are, if they've been injured, there's a whole package deal. There's a whole industry now about transitioning our guys back onto Civvy Street to get them jobs, to get them entrepreneurships. And then, of course, we've got this huge retention problem. So it's like, what am I doing here? We're shooting ourselves in the foot by getting these guys out when we're not getting them in. So we have a problem right now, a manning issue, staffing issue, to be correct. Out of 105,000 spots that we have between regular and reserve, and that's the entirety of our forces, 16,500 are vacant. So that's anytime that you do your war studies, anytime you've got more than 10% of a unit that's hors de combat, they're considered out of the, no longer effective. So we got close to 16% of the entire forces. So we have got operations that we can't deploy with our Air Force because we don't have pilots. The answer was to buy more planes. It's like, we don't have enough pilots, so let's buy more planes. It doesn't make sense. We got, the Navy can't.
And actually, that's a perfect segue then to that's actually a perfect segue to this question, which is, what is the current state of the mental health crisis facing soldiers in Canada? And a follow-up question to that is, are you surprised it's not given much more attention, their plight and the shocking rates of suicide, homelessness, and sometimes even domestic violence that happens with military families and whatnot?
Well, I mean, sadly, there's been a number of cases where there's a guy that took the life of his mother and his wife, and he was suffering from PTSD down east. A big case, people that fall through the cracks in a very dramatic fashion. We are, of course, a much smaller proportion in terms of the military to the civilian population, and it's I pointed this out before. It's very isolated. So we have 12,000 personnel of our regular force are married to another member of the forces. 1 in 5 members of our forces is married to another soldier. 40% of people joining the military have one or both parents in the military. You've got all kinds of cases where you've got a father and a son serving same time, mother and a daughter serving the same time. So whenever we had our casualties in Afghanistan, it wasn't impacting the country. Like, we're only talking about 65,000 regular force people. That's a small town. That little town was getting hit every time. And they've all, I mean, some of those 12,000 that are married have also been married to another member at some point, because there's been exes, and and they get moved. It's a nomadic group that goes back and forth. So, and of that 65,000, the majority of the casualties were all from the 20,000 in the Army. So we're talking a really small group that got hit really hard. There was 2,000 physical wounds, 158 killed, and then the untold number of PTSD cases, which is the invisible wounds, which there's a lot of guys being compensated for. And people would say, look, we didn't have that kind of thing with World War II. Like, why are these people now? Why is society so much weaker? And one of the things I point out is that World War I, I mean, they're gone, but when they went off to war, when they came back, everything had changed. They saw horrible stuff, but they came back. And World War II, they came back. Women were in the workforce. All these things that they had with assembly lines, like the whole net, that the world's greatest generation. But the boomers, I mean, they came back to a whole different world. So whatever they went off, whatever they did meant something, because when they came back, the world had changed.
There was
Our guys,
there was a social contract, a good social contract, in fact.
yeah, but it was, again, that they could go to the Legion because they formed the Legions, places where these guys could go and drink, and everybody understood, and that was the thing. That was just that was why you had this. You didn't have the mess anymore, but you could go to the Legion in every small town in Canada. So these guys, our guys, go off now. This battle group of whatever it is, 3,000. They go for 6 months. They go to a different part of the world, completely different. Culture's different, climate's different. The poverty is abject, the illiteracy is abject, and they get in there and they see that this world is like going back and living in the Bible, but they're driving around in modern armored vehicles, and the disconnect that was there, they're in danger all the time. They come home, nothing has changed, like nothing. And then they're told, hey, you know what, 6 months, you're going back. You do that 2 or 3 times. They know they're losing. The top brass know that they can't win. Everybody's telling them that they're doing great. Hey, one schoolhouse away from victory, support the troops. And they're going like, we're just adding to the corruption. We are not, and we paid bonuses. I mean, the guys that go, they would come back and they'd have a nest egg of money. The wife would say, look, we're going to have another kid. Why don't you do another tour? It was a purely, no, there may have been some diehard people that were in it for the notion that they really were doing a crusade and doing some good work. But the minute they got there and they realized, like, no, we're over there as Christian soldiers from the Western world defending a corrupt regime of people, wherein that country, it was still illegal to convert to Christianity on punishment of death. And then you got all these guys dying to prop up that regime. Nothing made sense. And the stuff that we were being told, we got them out of the burqas. Yeah, it was all great, but that burqa that's not necessarily even a Taliban thing. It was being enforced by them, but it wasn't being enforced in rural areas because you can't pick the poppy crop wearing a burqa. It was an urban status symbol, still is, by the way. And of course, now the Taliban won the war, they're backing. But we also in order to make some sort of sham out of the elections, they wanted to bring the Hazaras on side. So it was the warlord Muhakik. I interviewed him, by the way, and he was the warlord for them. And I mean, they always got the dirty end of the stick, but he wanted the law passed that I think it was if a man was allowed to have sex with his wife once a week, whether consensual or not, he was entitled to it. And I'm not making this up. We let them pass the law, and yet we claimed we were there representing, beefing up women's rights and giving them this and going to get them out of the burqa. No one ever talked about giving them hot baths and setting up, basic infrastructure so the hygiene could be addressed and other things. I mean, the majority of Afghan women with lifespan expectancy is like 46 years old will never in their lifetime have a hot bath. And we were going to give them democracy. We were going to give them a ballot box. It's like the priorities.
But then I have to ask this question about the morale that that Canadian soldiers face, in Afghanistan and elsewhere. Now, my own opposition to militarism, policing, and mass incarceration aside, do you think that because you've covered corruption in the military, you're very much a muckraker in that respect. And do you find that do you find that the privatization of the military and sometimes the hiring for-profit military contractors and companies only makes morale lower and makes abuses that take place, within the military more unaccountable and gives more incentive to folks to commit, crimes against humanity? I don't know if Canada engaged in that kind of stuff the way the United States did, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I mean, I certainly saw it in Afghanistan and Iraq, because I covered both extensively, and the use of companies like KBR to provide the food services and things. I mean, people see that, and they see that people are profiting massively from that. Sure, it's better than a traditional mess hall or a kitchen wagon or whatever it is. I mean, they've got all this access to it, but what they're pumping through, especially in places like Kandahar, where the base was feeding 22,000 people, the waste, and they had to fly all the food in and freeze it and then put it out there and then feed all these people. You go out the gate and the Afghanis are starving. Like they're in nomadic camps, like with no latrine. They're just doing cat discipline, scratching a hole in the desert and pooping and then covering it up and herding their goats. I mean, it's like for them to be there going to the ice cream bar or the pizza bar at midnight snack where it was steak and lobster night. Like, yeah, that part of it for the guys living in there on the camp, it's great for morale. But how do you convince yourself that we're going out and helping these people? We had politicians that came back and they boasted that we had ATMs in Afghanistan now. Well, yeah, on the base. You could get American dollars out of an ATM using your card. This was somehow progress. You couldn't put an ATM in a city of Kandahar where every third guy has got an RPG, because they would just help themselves to all the money. Like, it was, but to pretend that we were doing that, and that was part of the talking points. We've brought ATMs to Kandahar. to the base. We brought ice cream machines and air-conditioned gyms to the base. But you were not. I mean, I got to be honest. When we were there working on Embedded, we wore the full Afghan garb. Every time we've gone, we've worn it. The baggy pants, the vest. We grow beards, and I mean, if you watch the Outside the Wire, the documentary, you'll see
Yeah.
every trip we prepared for 6 weeks before we went, just to get into the thing, and then we'd be there 2 or 3 weeks. If we were, and we had Canadian passports, but us walking inside the base always attracted attention from the security because there wasn't supposed to be Afghans in the base. They worked outside, they broke rocks, they did stuff, whatever. They could take laundry out to them and do it, and then they brought it back in. But they were not supposed to be in among the NATO soldiers. So us dressed, I mean, Afghans weren't convinced that we were, like once they got within about 60 feet, they were like, "Who's that? Why is that guy wearing that, that costume?" But on the base, they thought we were the real deal. We would be stopped. And so
Well,
this idea that we're,
well, you've been talking about Afghanistan a lot, so I've decided to make that question, come already up. So I have to. So Afghanistan, where did it all go wrong? Why do you and what do you think, and what were the multiple factors that led to Canada and its NATO allies defeat? And yeah, and then going forward, what do you think people need to learn from Afghanistan and truly, and if they want, and if people really do want to help Afghanistan, what do you think people should be doing to truly help rebuild Afghanistan?
so I mean, people who understood the history of Afghanistan. I mean, we ensured that the Soviets were defeated when they were lured in there by the unrest that was going on with the jihadis and the mujahideen and the communist government that was in Kabul invited down the one faction. I'm not going to, but when they occupied it, the Americans and the CIA made sure that they were defeated, and it took time. It took them 10 years, and I think that they premised the end result on what happened there was President Najibullah was actually able to hold on for almost 3 years after the Soviets had pulled out, and the Soviet Union collapsed just subsequent to that. But the factions that were out there, the warlord factions, were not unified. They're all different. I mean, people who study, there's Uzbeks, there's Tajiks, there's the General Dostum, there's different guys. None of them trusted each other. They would switch sides. Dostum was on the Taliban side. He was on Afghani. He was on Najibullah's side. He was on the communist. He was everybody. And so these guys, when you realize it's that multifaceted and there's different languages and different cultures, we just assumed they were Afghans and they all hated the Soviets. Easy. Wasn't the case. So once the communists were defeated and there was no common enemy, it just devolved into this series of warlords holding territory, preying upon their people. And their abuse of their people was what led to the Taliban, who were seen as a salvation by the people. They were less corrupt than their own warlords. So that's how they got the backing, and they got the multi-factional backing, which led them to be what they were. But they never occupied the whole country. The Northern Alliance was still up in the north because the country's divided by the Hindu Kush Mountains, which I've crossed over, and only because of the satellite tunnel that the Soviets built is Afghanistan joined year round from north to south. Before that, there was 4 or 5 months of the year you just couldn't connect. And the fact that there's no infrastructure there, it's an illiterate, society, that they're impoverished. Like, what was to be gained by going in there? So if we go in, told ourselves it was the Taliban, they were housing bin Laden, we've got the reason to go in so that it will prevent the terrorism. But then we started to make it into this experiment that we were going to make it into a democracy.
Yeah.
Where they got that notion, why they thought that was going to be good. And we took all the warlords that were the reason the Taliban existed and put them back in charge because they had factions and they could organize quickly, and we just made them the police chiefs, or we made them the district chief, or whatever it was. There is no way you can impose democracy, an educated democracy, in that short span of time. And you had all of these snake oil salesmen telling you, oh, it's going to be a marathon, not a sprint, and yet conducting it in a series of sprints to achieve the same purpose. Build the schoolhouses quickly. Why? What's the rush? Let the Afghans build it. Teach them how to build it. We didn't do that. We built things for them. They had no ownership of it. We didn't have I repeatedly questioned, why did we not have apprenticeship programs for these guys to learn how to drive the bulldozer, to do the thing? No, they were given the menial task because they were illiterate, and all they could do was break rocks. So we didn't take them aside and say, let's give them a grade 10 education in their own language. Let's create an Afghan army based on their traditional, like segregate them because they are separate. The Tajiks could have their own regiment, Uzbeks could have their own regiment, the Pashtuns could have their own with their own traditional headgear. The British understood this in India with the Bengal Lancers. Each one had a squadron of Muslims, and they had Sikhs, and then they had Hindus. Different diets, different, but they all fought under one banner collectively with a unified pride. We didn't do that. You know what we did? We started the Afghan army. We put these guys, these illiterate, pushed them all together. They had to be trained in like 3 different languages just so they could all understand. Gave them all this Romanian cast-off body armor and helmets and old Kalashnikovs. Like these guys looked like they just looked, I mean, like a ragtag. They didn't look fierce. The Taliban looked fierce. They looked like warriors. But these guys dressed in some other country's clothing, like Western style clothing with uniforms and whatever. They were like defeated before they started. They were, and they could see that the Americans had all the, gear and all the stuff that they didn't have, and we're supposed to go out on patrol together. Like, they're not idiots. They may not speak English well, but they're not idiots, and they're going to do the fighting for you. They have more in common with the Taliban. In fact, many of our trips, we would know if we were on the streets. There'd always be police checkpoints, police everywhere, and whatever. When they disappeared, because their cousins called them and said, "Don't go to work today," then you knew something big was about to happen. And it did. And then they would all come back to work. But when something was going to happen, they weren't going to take a bullet for an American if they didn't have to.
Unbelievable. And I mean, yeah, I mean, it's it's absolutely crazy. And yet Afghanistan is marketed to us as the good war, as the good noble cause. I'm curious your thoughts on that before I ask you about Yugoslavia. But
yet, when the Afghanistan papers come out, you realize that they knew from the get-go that we couldn't win this war. They knew, but kept selling it, and then even once it was confirmed, kept selling it. And then the idea, they trained those really special elite Afghan units. It was like Afghan Delta Force, and they did equip them, and they brought them to the States and trained them, and they put them back. And they probably believed that they would have been westernized enough that they would want that, and that they would fight for Ashraf Ghani the same way that the communist soldiers had fought for Najibullah for a couple of years and be able to hang on for just long enough that you guys could get out of there and, say we took that horse to water and then he died of thirst. But they didn't. They saw what happened. And they knew that the minute Ashraf Ghani got on and got out of there, they didn't fight. And crazily enough, when the Taliban took over, they had helicopters in the air like days later. No illiterate Pashtun Taliban can teach himself to fly a helicopter in a couple of days. So the pilots that were there were still prepared to fly for Afghanistan, not necessarily.
But in hindsight, then what do you I have to ask this question then. What do you think going forward folks should do if they sincerely do want to help out Afghanistan and so forth? Because a lot of people are those who still want us to fight in Afghanistan. I think there are even people who want us to actually even reinvade Afghanistan and continue on indefinitely this violent soap opera. I mean, I mean, and of course, we always hear new horror stories about what the Taliban is doing, and the Taliban is stripping more women and people of their rights. So, what do you think should be the way forward in dealing with Afghanistan? Because I know Alfred Desaias, who's been on the program, said said about the United States and its allies that you don't go into a country, prop up reactionary leaders, then invade the country and destroy the country, and then say, "Oh, not our responsibility, but we are going to sanction you because we lost the wars." So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
So they're going to punish the Taliban by withholding the aid money and all this stuff, seizing the bank accounts. It's only going to further punish the people. Like, the Taliban may not be the most magnanimous, whatever, but they were better than the other warlords for sure. And they knew that.
The ones that Canada was backing, in other words.
The warlords. I mean, the guys that became, overnight, they became the defense minister or whoever it was, but they were just put into positions because that's who was going to run the country. Karzai was the implant that they had to accept. But there was the movie War Machine. I don't know if you saw it. It was what's his name? Brad Pitt plays the part of the general. He's supposed
Okay,
to be like
I'll have to check
Stanley
that out.
McChrystal. It's really good because there's one scene where he goes in and he goes, "Where's Karzai?" And they tell him he's up in bed, and he goes up and he goes into his room. And Karzai's like, "Why are you here? What's going on?" He says, "I need your permission before we can launch the offensive." And the actor playing Karzai looks at him and says, "You and I both know that's not true, but thank you for asking me." Because he's like, "You're just going to do it." He says, "We both know that's not true, but anyway, let me go back to sleep." And they carry on with the offensive. But it was a spoof. There was comedic moments, but unfortunately, yeah, it's
It captured the dark farcity of the dark farce of it all.
but it was Stanley McChrystal. What was his name? The guy, the general, who was based loosely on him. But these guys, they would come in, and each time they were put in command, it was like they're going to win the war. They're going to change the direction. It was like a repeat of Vietnam. And you realize after the Afghanistan papers that there were people that knew it couldn't be won, but they would let some buffoon of a general go in and think, this time I'm going to clamp down, and we're going to get rid of all the Burger Kings and all the circus that's on the bases, and we're going to focus on fighting. Fighting what? You were already there. Like, what are you fighting? The hatred of the people because you're there? Easy solution. Leave. Has a single American been killed since we left? No. Did they come and get us here? No. I mean, how do we help them? We send people in to help them, and they're not going to, if they offer them Pashtun Valley, which is the promise of protection, they're not going to do anything to them. I actually plan to go back as soon as we get a break in the schedule. We met with the Taliban in Doha, Qatar. They have a representative there, so we can get a visa and get back in. Myself and my colleagues plan to go in, but we just have to get a window to do so.
Well, here's hoping people do follow your here's hoping people do follow your advice, especially but I have to ask this question, which is, if you were a teacher, if you were a history teacher, a journalism professor, and you were allowed to go on any TV program or classroom and explain why left-leaning and anti-war, anti-imperial folks should have been opposed to NATO's bombing of Serbia and Kosovo being an independent country, Mr. Taylor, the floor is yours.
Floor is mine. Well, I mean, if you look now at the exact same rhetoric that we hear about Ukraine, is that we're going in and helping the Kiev regime to withstand this invasion. No thoughts are given to the ethnic Russians that were in the Donbass region who broke away in 2014. If this was the equation in Kosovo, we would have been helping the Serbs in Belgrade to keep Kosovo as part of Serbia. We were exactly 180. It's exactly, only difference being it would, if we were the Albanians helping in that war, would have been different. We're an outside third party. Russia is on the border. They are ethnic Russians and Russian-speaking people in the Donbass who, in 2014, broke with the Kiev regime because they curtailed their language rights. In Canada, we understand if we curtailed tomorrow the language rights of the people right across my river, the Quebecers, they would separate with guns. The fact that we live in a bilingual country and we realize that we're two separate solitudes, we understand that. Canada could have taken a lead role in 2014 to negotiate a bilingual agreement, etc., and said to these guys, no, put the brakes on this outlawing of the Russian language. You're just going to drive them away. And they did. But then the confusion, it all became, oh, it's Russian backed, it's this. Well, if you are Russian, you're not Russian backed. The people in the Donbass, Donetsk, Luhansk, I mean, they did vote. They had a referendum in 2014, and Vladimir Putin said, I don't want you. I want you to remain part of a federated Ukraine. But to compare it to Serbia and Kosovo, we bombed Belgrade to make sure that they relinquished that territory instead of us, again, saying, look, we can come in here and you're going to have, like, they're now 85% of the population, the Albanians. You got to give them some language rights. You got to, Serbia's not just Serbia. We need to talk to you about bilingualism, which the Ohrid agreement in Macedonia, it was the Americans that negotiated. It was anywhere that there's more than 25% of the population is Albanian, they have to have services in both languages, which is ripe coming from the Americans who don't have bilingualism in a country with how many Hispanics. But they saw that in Macedonia, to be fair, you need to have services in your language. Like the hypocrisy, it just pick whatever it is it the right to self-determination in Kosovo, or is it the sovereignty of the map in Ukraine? Because we flipped on that completely, and we're saying this is the first war in Europe. It's like we bombed Serbia for 78 fucking days. Like, are we forgetting that? We're still paying off the debt from dropping all those bombs. So
Believable. And
it didn't create a successful new state in the heart of Europe. It is the most corrupt. It's one of the poorest, the highest unemployment. When the migrants flowed through, a lot of the Kosovo Albanians went with them out of the country that's now technically their own. So, we didn't break an egg to make an omelet. We just broke some eggs.
so you reject completely the ongoing thesis that a lot of people, even critics of NATO, will often say, "Oh, but Yugoslavia, we were in the right on that war." So you reject that completely, then?
I think there's still about 46% of countries that refuse to recognize Kosovo as independent. So it's in the UN. There's a great number of countries that still don't. Russia being one of them, and Spain another one. I mean, anybody who's got issues with their own territories being possibly ceded away. I know Azerbaijan was against it. Like these countries, they won't get into the EU. They're not fully into the UN. It's not a. What did they make? And even on things like Worldle, the New York Times Worldle, when they show Serbia, they have to add a gray area for Kosovo instead of the black, because it's not. Some people say it is, some people say it isn't. So
Interesting. And I wanted your thoughts on this, the scandals that have plagued the Canadian military with respect to systemic sexual abuse, harassment. What do you think needs to be done to eradicate this ongoing crisis? And and then, do you agree or disagree with frequent guests on this show, Yves Engler, who said that the military, at its core, is patriarchal and misogynistic, ergo, along with its racism, its heteronormativity and gender conformativity, its machismo, violent masculinity, this is an institution that is obsolete and needs to be dismantled. I'm curious to your response.
So, I mean, I agree with Eve on most things for sure, but I am from that institution. I joined the Army in '82. My group through boot camp was the last ones before they adopted the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada. So they could still lay hands on us. That we're the last platoon. I'm the last of the old guard. There was no women in combat. It was illegal to be gay. It was punishable if you knew of someone's orientation and did not reveal that to the authorities, you too could be being sent out of the military. There was no tolerance for that. Drugs, it was the same thing. If you were caught smoking a joint, you went to jail. I mean, it was crazy. It was like, but this was the system. And honestly, at that point, like the culture that was there, it was like, why would any woman ever want to be in this group? I mean, it was. I mean, were we tough? Yeah, ridiculously so. We're the toughest, most hardened bunch of chronic alcoholics that you'd ever come across. But we were proud of you
An
drink until.
ex-CIA person actually said the same thing about the CIA, funny enough.
But it was like just the idea that women could be on ships or this without it being a distraction, because it was just like, this doesn't work. Well, that's my generation. And then in '87 they were allowed into combat units. There was problems. There's been problems. And a lot of this historical stuff that's coming out now, a lot of it dates back to that period when it was new. But people today are not the same. There is a much wider acceptance for everything, in terms of women being part of it. Every soldier that's now in the service has only ever known them to be part of it. We have a female chief of defense staff. We had a female vice chief of defense staff. All the top positions are now currently filled with women officers who joined back in those days and have come through all this. So, is there going to be change? Is there change? That's in a short span of time. I mean, everything in the military is steeped in tradition. Most of our cavalry or armored corps units are still named after cavalry units, and they will still have a horse troop, kind of like our they'll have guys come out in parades, and they'll still. I mean, it's crazy. We'll have ceremonial expenses, but it's all part of our tradition and all these things. Which, the minute you go back there, then there was no women. There wasn't part of it. There was, in theory. I mean, back in the Royal Navy days, back in the Nelson's days, there was women on ships. They just didn't talk about them. That was,
And
I don't know if you know, but the
go
phrase
ahead,
"son
man.
of a gun," son of a gun. The full phrase is "son of a gun deck whore."
Really?
What is? She was. It doesn't mean you were born of a cannon. It's a really bad insult because you're a. And where do you think the powder boys came from? And the like, they're at sea for years, and all of a sudden there's boys on board. Like, where'd they come from? It's just
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
All
But
right,
but we're trying to live up to a false. There was, and then it's anyway.
but if I understand you correctly, I think you do think that there is room for reform in the military. In fact, that being said, that's actually a perfect segue to this question, which is now I don't know if you've been following the debates raging about police brutality or state terror, as academic journalist and activist Solomon Kamajan would call it. Now, some voices, have called for abolishing the police. Others, who I call radical reformists, have called for community control over the police and things like ending the drug war, the militarization of the police, and whatnot. And I'm curious, what would be your thoughts on that? And do you think something similar could happen in the Canadian military? I actually do believe in abolishing the Canadian military CSIS because I've often described them as being the police on steroids. So I'm curious, your response to that.
I think you're giving them too much credit for the size of our forces and their capability. But um, with the police, this issue with the police is once it becomes them versus us, and the people turn their animosity to the police feel threatened, so then they exert their authority. It was a guy that I'd served with. He was one of the police union guys in Winnipeg. Very tough city. I mean, it's very tough. Western, a lot of indigenous there, a lot of police issues with population. And we had chatted about something. I did something that twigged him, and it was one of my TED talks about the fact that we're as different from them as we are. From, like whenever we look at
Wait,
somebody,
you mean beyond propaganda? That,
yeah,
great
yeah.
TED talk,
I
by
mean,
the way. I was
yeah, I didn't even know what they were. Anyways, one of those things where he picked up on that, and he did a series of commercials where he wanted to let the people of Winnipeg know that the police officers, like they showed that they are also people, that they play ball with the kids. They go to the same Tim Hortons. They go, like, just the fact that we need to normalize this and say, I may put a uniform on and I got to do my job, but I'm still a person. I've got kids. I've got, I mean, like there is, we tend to look at them and then we make it into a blanket thing. And if we don't see them as people, and I talked about, I think it was the TED talk about the American forces in Iraq when they wear the helmets and the goggles and they make themselves into the stormtroopers from Star Wars. Easy for the guys to kill them because they can't see them as people, right? So it's like when they had me in custody when I was there as a hostage, and the curiosity factor was, I mean, I was much younger then. It was 20 years ago this year, and I've been a soldier. So I mean, to them, they had one in captivity. They had a turtle out of his shell, and he was vulnerable. So they wanted to come and see what made this guy tick. Like, you know what I mean? It was this weird, because they've been fighting them and they've been out there, but they didn't have any involvement with them. And of course, the same with our Canadians in Afghanistan. No one ever took their helmets off and armor off and then showed them that they're just people. They went in there, everybody's bulked up like the cops are now. That's part of the thing with the cops. I look at these guys in Ottawa, and it looks like they're ready for a patrol in Kandahar. And they're not out at a riot, they're just doing the beat. They got body armor. They got all kinds of backup. They got more weaponry, tasers. Like, we need to bring it back. When I was a kid, they were lucky if they had a gun, even, right? Now, I went to school and lived in England as a kid, and the Bobbies only had a baton, and they were proud of that fact. So I don't know. I think it's a two-way street, and it's got to be a dampening down of emotions because people is the police brutality stuff. But I mean, I've seen all kinds of videos. I'm sure you have too. And you go, what the hell was that guy thinking? But once they've got it in their heads that they're hated and that their uniform is seen as imposing, like they themselves, it's either you take the uniform off and remove yourself from it, or you become what everyone is already assuming you are. So
But then with the military, do you think more democratic control over the military would help the military when it comes to uh, when it comes to issues like war crimes overseas, or even uh, sexual abuses that happens in the military? So like the late Glenn Ford of Black Agenda Report, he was an advocate of community control over the police, which is the people of guess Los Angeles, South Central Los Angeles or Harlem, or the Canadian equivalents. They would be in control over what constitutes policing, who gets even hired as a police officer, and if there are human rights abuses, then those people would be held accountable by that very body and fired or anything like that. Because something like that happened with the. Do you think something like that could happen with the military? Because a lot of people have criticized the military investigating themselves when sexual abuses happen, or when crimes against humanity happen overseas, like in Afghanistan or Iraq and so forth.
Well, we've had our cases that came back where a guy, one of the officers, shot a badly wounded Afghan prisoner, and people, the system came out. Like, some guy said that they shouldn't have said anything, but it did come out, and it was, at the end of the day, I think he was acquitted. But yeah, it's in this day and age, you got to think that everything's going to come out. So people need to conduct themselves, and I think that's yet to be learned completely. But what you're talking about, as far as people, like, we have on our reserves indigenous police forces, but that's good to a certain degree. But then at some point, if you get involved and you have an actual homicide, or you have something of a grander nature, then you do need specialized people. Like, we never built a police force in Afghanistan that was an actual police force. We didn't teach people how to fingerprint. We didn't teach them, like, the basics of searches and, like, the detective work, the long process, all that stuff. We didn't teach them that. So they weren't an effective police force. They were a paramilitary force of illiterate teenagers with guns and a badge. And that was it was the facade of a secure environment. In what world is an illiterate 16-year-old with a Kalashnikov and a badge a sign of security? Like, this was the crazy part. And their answer was always just to keep generating more of these guys. Well, they preyed upon the locals because they could. And they thought, well, if we pay them more, then they won't rob the locals. In what naive world would that be the case, man? Eventually, he's just going to pay someone else to go rob them. Like, he's going to become it was insane that they wouldn't understand basic human nature. Now, for the military to investigate the military, we have Esprit de Corps over the years. We've exposed a lot of that stuff. Things have changed to some degree. Base commanders used to have a lot of pull. Like, there was a double edge there. There was, like, the basic crime, but it's the base commander, or it's so and so. And we had that horrific case where we had a colonel in Trenton who actually, he raped and murdered 2 women. And it was the police, when they first investigated him, they said, well, it couldn't be him. He's a colonel in the Air Force. He's a base commander. We just let him, like, he got a slide, until it turned out that no, in fact, Russ Williams is his name. You can look him up. It's he had a penchant for stealing women's underwear and then posing in them, and he kept a collection. Oh, I got a call coming in here. Sorry.
No problem.
Sorry, I won't take that. Anyway, yeah, it was a really embarrassing thing. Which, at the end of the day, he's still doing hard time. But the military went and stripped him of his rank after he was convicted, and they told the media, don't ever use his rank, that he was a colonel. And it's like, well, no, but he was a psychopath that lived among us, and that's how dangerous it was. He actually was reviewed. He was able to fly a plane. He was in an aircrew. He's the base commander, and still he was able to do what he did, almost with immunity, because of people's respect for the rank and the station. So yeah, but that's changing. I mean, our top guys all got rotated out. I mean, it was almost a complete sweep of our senior brass, one after the other, were taken out on allegations. Some have been cleared, some have been just, not returned. I mean, none came back. They were all taken out. None came back, but some of them got settlements and some of them had whatever happened. But at the time, it was a complete clean sweep, and now we've got almost an entire what do you call it, staffing by female officers. Which again, we'll see what happens in the next few years.
And second to last question is, do you think next war, whether it's an official war that Canada joins, like Afghanistan, or a fake peacekeeping one, like what's happening in Haiti, or another proxy war, like what's happening in Ukraine, uh, do you think that given the shortages that that you see that the army is having a problem with that, and if people really, and a lot of people say that a lot of people say that they want free healthcare, they want free education. Do you think then we should actually have a draft in Canada, especially for those most gung ho about NATO, the pivot to Asia, and so forth?
I just actually talked about this recently about having national service. I don't think we could do it for the military arm, but right now our military is constantly being drawn off. I'm sure it's the same in the States, for disaster relief. We just sent another 75 guys out to Jasper to help with the disaster relief. Last summer was terrible in terms of guys constantly being sent off in penny packets to here and there. These are all unscheduled. If you're trying to train a military force that's already woefully under strength, you're trying to put people into training schools, etc., and then you got to keep sending people off to do these little jobs, which are, you don't know when the end date is. It's not something you can say it's going to be 2 weeks here. You don't know. That fire could burn for 3 months. So that's the part where we need to backstop them. They can't keep doing that and rebuild themselves. So something, whether it's getting a core of veterans and people who served and got out to make a structure, which we have a team Rubicon. I think it's based on an American venture, the same idea. So it's veterans who want to help out in these situations, and they've got the skill sets. And then you impose a mandatory national service, which could be regionally invoked if you're registered for it and you're called up, kind of like a jury duty. But if you're a young, fit person and you're registered, something happens, you're out filling sandbags. You're out lining up here in your next 2 weeks. And I mean, what other people experience, what the Army has to go through is like, I now have a sudden, unexpected 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months out of my life, not planned for, that I've got to go and deploy. Whether I'm going to go to somebody's wedding or I'm going to do whatever. I mean, this is a huge interruption. And they wonder why morale's in the toilet because these guys, and there's an expectation that we have a military force, we pay our taxes, they should come and help me when there's a big blizzard or there's a big whatever, the power lines are down, send them in. But if that was Team Rubicon, an enhanced Team Rubicon, fleshed out whenever they had to, they would go and call these people in on short notice or put them on notice and bring them out. I think it would be that whole thing where we see people like the other person, like the policing. I mean, you realize that they're just people and this is what they got to do.
It almost sounds as if you would be an advocate of whatever the military doesn't use anymore, whatever room that's not being used by the military, actually can transition that to some kind of a civilian form of thing, like natural disaster relief and so forth.
Like a civil protection organization.
Yeah.
These guys would be out there and they could be, I mean, and they could actually have them part of the mandatory services when you register. You have to go through, it could be a 1 or 2 week course, first aid, basic protection, like for different things that they could be trained for. And then you're registered, you're there, and they know you can do basic things. And then something happens in that area, you get called out. Don't bring them in from Quebec to go to Saskatoon, but people would be, and something happens in your area, it's flooding in Quebec, you're out filling sandbags, right? But yeah, then they could understand the basic structure. Probably about 2 week course would be enough. Then you go back. We're inventing this as we speak, but yeah, I think it's going to work, man.
But I still think, I still think for the aggressive stand with Ukraine folks and the and that crowd, that we should have like a mandatory draft. It'll be good for it'll be good for the military and it'll be good for the peace movement, because then you'll see the number of people who want to.
Well, the chest thumpers that wanted to go and help Ukraine, I mean, the ones who really did, they did. They went to that Foreign Legion and they've been over there. I mean, that's or they joined Azov or whatever the hell they did, which, I mean, if they want to talk a big game, but it's like I'll hold your coat while you go in and go get that guy. No, it's time for them to pay up. Anyway, I got
Exactly.
one more. I got to get going soon. So,
Oh, well, perfect, because we're almost at the end of the program, which is now we end the program usually doing the questionnaire that was done by Marcel Proust, later the late popular French broadcaster Bernard Pivot, and perfected by my hero, the late James Lipton of Inside the Actors Studio. Mr. Taylor, before you go, it's your turn to do it. So, Mr. Taylor, what is your favorite words?
my word.
Favorite words, yeah.
Authenticity.
What is your least favorite words?
Is Donald Trump a word?
Yeah.
It's 2 words. Sorry.
What turns you on, inspires you spiritually, emotionally, or psychologically?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think probably the memory of my father. He was a good man.
Oh, fantastic! That's a very nice response. Then, what turns you off then?
I can't say it. Phoniness,
Phoniness. Okay.
which
Cough,
takes
cough.
in all the propaganda, the lies, and all that. Everything is just phony.
Yeah. Cough, cough. Justin Trudeau. What is your favorite curse word? And being from Canada, if you have a francophone word, please feel free to share.
I like the word fuckwit.
Fuckwit.
Listen here, you fuckwit. And tabernacle would be, I think, tabernacle, écolise. My French is limited. Yes, je suis le maudit anglais. So
Yeah.
tabernacle. Yeah.
Then, what sound or noise do you love, followed by what sound or noise do you dislike?
What noise?
Yeah, so what sound or noise do you love, followed by what sound or noise do you dislike?
Are you saying summer noise?
Sound or noise. Sound or noise.
Sound or noise? Cat purring. I like.
A cat purring you like, okay. And then what sound or noise do you dislike?
Nails on a chalkboard.
Nails on chalkboard, okay. And then what profession, if you weren't doing the brilliant journalism that you do and the brilliant publication you do, what profession, if you weren't doing yours, would you love to attempt?
The one that I love the most, because I've been an artist and I've been a musician and I've been a soldier and I've been an author, I've been a filmmaker, I've been a publisher, war correspondent. I would go back to drumming.
Go back to drumming. Okay.
I was a drummer.
Nice.
I played on the bar circuit in a band called The Offenders. Yeah, but that band is long since defunct. But yeah.
Well, folks, if you're out there, give Scott another chance. And then, what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
At this point in my life,
Yeah.
to go back to soldiering.
Okay, all right. And final question. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates, or whatever is your vision of the afterlife? And even if you're an atheist, please do answer the question.
This is me getting through the pearly gates. I have to say, I would just be happy if you let me in.
Well, fantastic. And you will be let in. And, well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1, our All Things Canada edition, with Scott Taylor, one of the few unembedded journalists in Canada. Next time we have you on, we definitely have to talk about that embedded journalism and unembedded journalism. He is the founder and still editor-in-chief of Esprit de Corps, which is a military magazine covering Canadian topics, which he founded in 1988, again, awarded by Press TV's Unembedded Journalist of the Year in 2008. He's the author of several books, including Tarnished Brass, Crime and Corruption in the Canadian Military, Diary of an Uncivil War, The Violent Aftermath of the Kosovo Conflict, Unembedded, 2 decades of Maverick war reporting, Unreconciled Differences, Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And he has appeared in great documentaries like the 6-part docuseries Truth to the Powerless, Yugoslavia, The Avoidable War, The Weight of Chains, Myth of Profit, and Afghanistan Outside the Wire, and From Belgrade to Baghdad and Homecoming, The Casualties of War. Mr. Taylor, thank you so much for coming on. I really hope this will be the first of many conversations we have, both on and off the air. And until then, all my best and keep doing the great work you do.
All right, I do have to go. I'm way over time here, so I gotta go.
No
Thanks.
problem.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Ciao till then.
Okay.